March 23, 1945, 10:52 in the morning. Winston Churchill's aircraft descends toward Bavaria, southern Germany. Below the wings lies cratered concrete, oil stains from Luftwaffe operations, and the forward positions of Field Marshal Bernard Montgomery's 21st Army Group, immaculately prepared, perfectly positioned, ready to execute the largest river crossing operation since D-Day. Churchill had personally promised Montgomery this moment. He had arranged the press. He had written the congratulatory statement. He had traveled thousands of miles to witness British military excellence at its finest. Then, 30 minutes before landing, the radio delivered 4 words that stopped everything. Patton crossed last night. Not this morning. Not with Montgomery's 5,000 artillery pieces in his airborne army. Last night, with canvas boats. What did Churchill say when he landed? And what did that moment reveal about who was actually controlling the final chapter of the war in Europe? To understand the full weight of those 4 words reaching Churchill's aircraft, you have to understand what he had built his expectations around and what Montgomery had spent the previous 6 months constructing. Operation Plunder was not simply a river crossing, it was a statement. According to declassified British planning documents, the operation involved the British Second Army, the U.S. Ninth Army, and Canadian forces along a 22-mile front at Rhine River. Montgomery had assembled 5,500 artillery pieces for the preparatory bombardment. He had coordinated Operation Varsity, the largest single-lift airborne deployment of the entire European campaign, using 1,625 transport aircraft, 1,348 gliders, and 889 escort fighters to deliver over 22,000 airborne infantry onto the eastern bank simultaneously with the ground assault. He had positioned press corps, arranged photographers, and coordinated the BBC to have a statement ready the moment his forces secured the far bank. Churchill had personally written the congratulatory communique celebrating British military excellence that would be released to the world the moment Montgomery's forces established their bridgehead. Everything was prepared. Every variable had been accounted for, except one. 200 kilometers to the south, George Patton had been watching the same river with a completely different calculation running through his mind. The official U.S. Army history of the Rhine crossings, documented in the last offensive volume of the United States Army in World War II series, is direct about his motivation. It states plainly that Patton wanted a Rhine crossing, most of all, in order to beat Field Marshal Montgomery across the river. His 12th Corps under Major General Mantenetti had driven hard through mid-March. The 5th Infantry Division, the Red Diamond, had crossed the Moselle, the Sauer, and the Kiel rivers. It had breached the Siegfried Line. Reconnaissance now reported something critical. German defenses near Oppenheim, 12 miles south of Mainz, were thin. German command had concentrated remaining reserves northward, expecting the main Allied crossing at Montgomery's sector. The door at Oppenheim was open. Patton made his decision without hesitation. According to the 5th Division G3 Journal, cited in the U.S. Army history, he told Major General Eddy directly, "We've got to get a bridgehead at once. Every day we save means the savings of hundreds of American lives. We can take the Rhine on the run." Eddy had been planning to cross on March 23rd. Patton pushed the schedule forward by 24 hours. When Eddy relayed the order to Major General S. Leroy Irwin, commander of the 5th Infantry Division, Irwin protested that a well-planned and ordered crossing was impossible by that night. He added one qualifier. He could manage to get some sort of bridgehead. The U.S. Army history records Patton's response precisely. Some sort of bridgehead was exactly all he was after. Think carefully about what that means. Patton did not need a textbook operation. He needed a fact-on-the-ground troops on the eastern bank in sufficient numbers that any order to withdraw would be militarily pointless before the order could even be issued. He was not just outmaneuvering the Germans. He was constructing a situation that his own chain of command could not reverse. To add further deception, Patton ordered his forces to lay a heavy smokescreen near Mainz, making German observers believe the crossing would occur at the expected location, while the actual assault moved quietly 10 miles south to Oppenheim. Soldiers of the 11th Infantry Regiment, 5th Infantry Division, descended to the Rhine's western bank at Oppenheim and climbed into canvas assault boats. No artillery preparation, no searchlights, no air cover. The men paddled across in near total darkness. According to the U.S. Navy's operational history of the Rhine crossings, German artillery did not respond for several hours after the operation began. Many German soldiers were asleep. Others occupied rear positions, confident the sector was stable. When American soldiers emerged from the dark water, resistance collapsed almost immediately. Private Tucker of the 5th Infantry Division, whose account appears in Third Army crossing records, recalled, "This kind of came as a surprise, but everything was so well prepared for us. They brought up a row of trucks filled with assault boats. It was really a simple thing, just like basic training." Germany's final defensive barrier in the West reduced in the one American private to something that felt like a training exercise on a calm river. By dawn on March 23rd, Third Army had a solid bridgehead on the eastern bank. 6 battalions were across. Engineers from the 1st and 988th Treadway Bridge Companies had begun pontoon construction. Total casualties across the entire assault phase, fewer than 34 killed and wounded. Patton had breached the Rhine, the river that German propaganda declared impregnable. The barrier that German military doctrine insisted required massive preparation and overwhelming force in a single night, with canvas boats at a cost that would not fill one hospital ward. Now came the decision that history would remember: what to tell his chain of command and when. Patton waited until the bridgehead was secure. Then, on the morning of March 23rd, he called General Omar Bradley at 12th Army Group headquarters. What followed is one of the most precisely documented conversations of the entire Western campaign, preserved in Patton's memoir, War as I Knew It, and confirmed in Bradley's own account. Patton's tone was deliberately casual, as though reporting routine operations. He told Bradley, "Brad, don't tell anyone, but I'm across." Bradley responded with genuine shock. "Well, I'll be damned. You mean across the Rhine?" Patton replied, "Sure am. I sneaked a division over last night, but there are so few Germans around there they don't know it yet. So don't make any announcement. We'll keep it a secret until we see how it goes." That instruction to keep it secret was not modesty, it was strategy. If Bradley immediately informed Chef, Eisenhower might order a halt, a coordination pause that would allow Plunder to proceed as a primary narrative. By keeping it quiet, Patton was buying hours to get enough forces across that any reversal order would arrive too late. Bradley faced his own calculation. Patton had crossed at a different location than assigned, a day ahead of schedule, without Chef coordination. Technically, this was insubordination from his most effective subordinate, but the bridgehead was already real. The cost had been negligible. The gain was expanding by the hour. Bradley made the decision that defined his approach to managing Patton throughout the campaign. Support the outcome, address the process separately. He held the announcement, and he waited for the right moment. By evening on March the 23rd, everything shifted simultaneously. German artillery had located the Oppenheim bridgehead and was beginning to respond. Luftwaffe aircraft were attacking the pontoon bridges, and Operation Plunder was now hours from launch. The press window was closing. Patton called Bradley again. This time, according to both men's documented accounts in the official U.S. Army history, Patton was urgent and unambiguous. "Brad, for God's sake, tell the world we're across. I want the world to know Third Army made it before Monty starts across." Bradley authorized the release. The official U.S. Army history confirms the timing was calculated to take some of the luster from the news of Montgomery's crossing. American newspapers carried the Oppenheim story as front-page news on March 23rd, before Operation Plunder had fired its first preparatory round. And up in his aircraft, 30 minutes from landing in Bavaria, Winston Churchill received the radio message that unraveled months of planning in 4 words. Churchill landed at 10:52 that morning. Montgomery was waiting. The field marshal had already received the staff report about Oppenheim earlier that day. His documented reaction, according to multiple historical accounts from the period, was cold and precise. He described Patton's crossing as very American, his professional vocabulary for impulsive, underprepared, reliant on luck. Then he stated that Operation Plunder would proceed exactly as scheduled and would demonstrate the difference between crossing a river and executing a proper military operation. He did not change a single detail of his timetable. Not one gun was moved. Not one airborne unit was rerouted. In Montgomery's professional framework, Oppenheim was a tactical exploit against a thinly defended secondary sector. Plunder was a strategic built to deliver a breakthrough aimed at encircling the entire Ruhr industrial region. He believed the 2 operations were not comparable. The problem was that Churchill had just landed in Germany carrying the political weight of both of them simultaneously. Consider the impossible position Churchill now occupied. He had personally promised Montgomery that plunder would be the centerpiece of Allied victory in Europe. He had arranged the press coverage. He had traveled to Germany to witness it. He had written the statement that was waiting to be released. Now an American general had crossed the same river the night before, with canvas boats at a fraction of the cost, and the world already knew about it. Supporting Montgomery too forcefully meant implicitly demanding consequences for an American general who had succeeded spectacularly. Supporting Patton publicly meant undercutting British military prestige at a moment when the balance of power within the Allied coalition was already shifting decisively toward Washington. There was no clean position. There was only the choice of which political cost to absorb. Operation Plunder launched on the night of March 23, 1945, exactly as planned. 5,500 Allied artillery pieces opened fire along a 22-mile front at Rees, Wesel, and south of the Lippe River. Royal Air Force bombers had targeted Wesel through the afternoon. Canadian Highland Light Infantry Private Glenn Tomlin, age 21, preserved his personal account of the bombardment. An awful noise. The ground just shook. Everything shook. The guns started off, and then you heard the shells come over, and they whistled different sounds for different shells. As the tempo increased, it became what he called a continuous roar. Montgomery's operation was announcing itself to the world loudly, powerfully, and exactly as its architect intended. But the front pages of American newspapers were already set. The following morning, March 24th, Operation Varsity launched. According to the WW2 database and confirmed in U.S. Army operational records, 1,625 transports, 1,348 gliders, and 889 escort fighters delivered over 22,000 airborne infantry onto the Eastern Bank, the largest single-lift airborne operation of the European campaign. Churchill watched the air armada cross overhead from Montgomery's command position. Then he crossed the Rhine himself on March 25th, boarding a small launch on the Western Bank and making his way to the eastern side, accompanied by Montgomery and senior British officers. Commander Tommy Thompson, Churchill's naval aide, documented the crossing in his diary, later published in The War and Colonel Worden. The crossing succeeded without incident, but Eisenhower, upon learning of it, moved quickly to ensure Churchill returned to safety. The area remained within range of German artillery, and Eisenhower, as documented in the WW2 database account, had consistently fought to keep Churchill from exposing himself in active operational zone, exactly as he had during the Normandy landings the previous year. Churchill crossed the Rhine a second time on March 26, this time by jeep over a pontoon bridge at Xanten, before finally returning to England. Standing beside Eisenhower and watching the enormous scale of Varsity and Plunder unfold before him, Churchill delivered a documented assessment of the strategic situation that captured everything he understood about the war's final phase. His words, recorded in the WW2 database, drawing on primary accounts. "My dear General, the German is whipped. We have got him. He is all through." It was not theater. Both men standing at the Rhine that morning understood that the last major defensive barrier in the West had been broken on a broad front, and that what remained was pursuit, encirclement, and the political management of the war's end. But Churchill's private thoughts in those days carried a weight that his public composure concealed. He was watching something larger than a river crossing. He was watching the moment when British strategic primacy in the Western coalition passed decisively and permanently to the United States. Churchill stood at the Rhine, praised both operations publicly, and said all the right things. But what did he actually believe about what Patton had done? What did he tell his inner circle? And what does the documented record reveal about how Britain's most experienced wartime leader privately processed the moment when American audacity outpaced British preparation in front of the entire world? The answer is more complicated and more honest than most popular accounts acknowledge. The BBC broadcast that aired on the morning of March 24, 1945, became one of the most documented ironies of the entire Rhine crossing episode. The official U.S. Army history, preserved in the last offensive volume, records it with precise historical clarity. The British Broadcasting Corporation played without any alteration a pre-recorded speech by Prime Minister Churchill, praising the British forces for executing the first assault crossing of the Rhine in modern history. Officers of Third Army staff, according to the same official record, drew considerable professional satisfaction from the fact that this distinction had belonged to Third Army for over 36 hours before the broadcast aired. Churchill's pre-recorded words of British triumph reached the world's ears, while American engineers were already constructing their second pontoon bridge on a Rhine that American soldiers had been standing on since the night of March 22nd. The broadcast was not a lie. It was a prepared statement made obsolete by an event its authors did not anticipate. That distinction matters, and it captures precisely how completely Patton's timing had disrupted the political architecture Churchill had built around plunder. Now examine the statistical comparison that drove newspaper coverage and shaped public perception in the days that followed, because understanding those numbers as a narrative, not as dry data, reveals why Churchill faced a political problem that no amount of public composure could fully resolve. Montgomery assembled 5,500 artillery pieces, 1,625 transport aircraft, 1,348 gliders, 889 escort fighters, over 80,000 ground troops in the initial assault waves, and the full logistical apparatus of the First Allied Airborne Army. His operation achieved all its stated objectives and established a bridgehead 35 miles wide and up to 12 miles deep by March 28th. According to U.S. Navy operational records, Allied landing craft ferried over 15,000 men and 1,200 vehicles across the Rhine in the plunder sector between March 23rd and 26th alone. Casualties exceeded 500. Now place Patton's numbers beside those. 1 division in the initial assault. No artillery, no air support, no airborne forces, fewer than 34 casualties. By March 25th, 2 full Third Army divisions were advancing eastward from the Oppenheim bridgehead with minimal resistance. Newspapers do not report operational nuance. They report contrast, and the contrast between those two sets of numbers told a story that British press officers had no prepared response to address. The specific claim, repeated across YouTube content and popular dramatizations, is that Montgomery formally demanded in writing that Patton be relieved of command and that Churchill was forced to choose between the two men explicitly and openly. The declassified shelf files, Montgomery's published correspondence, and the official U.S. Army history contain no such formal documented demand. What the record does show is that Montgomery communicated genuine frustration about operational coordination and resource allocation through proper command channels. He argued that Patton's unauthorized timing had disrupted the agreed plan and complicated the broader coordinated advance. Those concerns were professionally legitimate, but the dramatic written ultimatum, the explicit demand for Patton's firing that popular accounts present as documented fact, does not exist in the primary source record. The real choice Churchill faced was more subtle, more political, and ultimately more revealing about the nature of coalition power than any formal confrontation would have been. The real choice was this. Churchill could use his political authority to pressure Eisenhower into imposing formal consequences on Patton for the unauthorized timing and location of the Oppenheim crossing. This was a legitimate option. Patton had crossed at a location different from his assigned sector, a day ahead of any approved schedule, without proper SHAFE coordination. There were genuine grounds for a formal reprimand, but exercising that option would have required Churchill to publicly criticize an American general for succeeding for crossing a river with fewer casualties in one night than Montgomery's operation sustained in its airborne phase alone. The American press would have interpreted it as British jealousy. The American public would have read it as an attempt to punish results in order to protect reputation. Roosevelt's administration, already managing the shifting balance of coalition power toward Washington, would have viewed it as exactly the kind of British political maneuver that American commanders had been warning about for 2 years. Churchill chose not to exercise that option. He praised both operations. He crossed the Rhine with Montgomery. He stood beside Eisenhower and delivered his assessment. "My dear General, the German is whipped," in language that honored both crossings without ranking them. It was a masterpiece of public composure over political reality. Eisenhower's documented response to the entire episode is the primary source that most popular accounts overlook, and it reveals more about the actual power structure of the Allied coalition than anything Churchill said publicly. On March 23, 1945, the morning after Patton crossed the Rhine without specific authorization at a location he had not been directed to cross, Ahead of any approved schedule, Eisenhower wrote Patton a personal letter. The text is preserved and documented at historyonthenet.com drawing on primary records. Eisenhower wrote, "I have frequently had occasion to state publicly my appreciation of the great accomplishments of this Allied force during the past 9 months. The purpose of this note is to express to you personally my deep appreciation of the splendid way in which you have conducted Third Army operations from the moment it entered battle last August. You have made your Army a fighting force that is not excelled in effectiveness by any other of equal size in the world." Read that letter against the political moment it was written in. Churchill was managing the public narrative. Eisenhower was managing the strategic reality, and his letter made the American position unmistakably clear. Results had been delivered, and results were what mattered. Pause here for the alternate reality that sharpens exactly why Churchill's choice in Eisenhower's letter carried lasting consequences. If Churchill had successfully pressured Eisenhower into formally restricting Patton's operational freedom after the Rhine crossing, what changes in the final 6 weeks of the European War? By early April, Third Army was racing across central Germany. It reached Ohrdruf, the first concentration camp site encountered by American forces on April 4th. It pushed toward the Czech border. It captured hundreds of thousands of prisoners and enormous quantities of materiel as German resistance collapsed. The speed of Third Army's advance in April and May 1945 compressed the war's final phase in the West in ways that a restricted or cautioned advance could not have replicated. Every week of additional operations meant additional casualties across all Allied fronts. Understood this calculation when he chose silence over confrontation. That choice preserved Patton's operational freedom, and it confirmed in the unspoken language of coalition command that American military judgment now set the tempo of the war. Patton's own documented actions in the days after the crossing capture his personality at its most characteristic. On March 24th, he crossed the Rhine personally on the pontoon bridge his engineers had constructed at Oppenheim. Multiple contemporary accounts, including those preserved in Warfare History Network's record of the crossing, document what happened halfway across. He stopped. He addressed the assembled soldiers and press photographers. He urinated into the Rhine River, telling the crowd, "I've been looking forward to this for a long time." Reaching the eastern bank, he reached down and picked up 2 handfuls of German soil, a deliberate imitation of William the Conqueror's gesture upon landing in England in 1066, a historical parallel Patton had explicitly invoked throughout the campaign. He declared, "Thus William the Conqueror." That same day, he sent a communique to Eisenhower at Schaeff. The message read, "Dear Schaeff, I have just pissed. For God's sake, send some gasoline." Theatrical, irreverent, and precise in its embedded complaint about supply priority, it was vintage Patton. Church accounts from the period later commented that photographs of the act should not be reproduced. He understood the gesture's symbolism too clearly to want it amplified in British press. Churchill's private assessment of Patton, documented by his military secretary in accounts cited across multiple historical sources of the period, reveals a man capable of holding 2 entirely contradictory professional judgments simultaneously. His secretary recorded Churchill saying, "Patton is what we'd have called a thruster, a commander who attacks because instinct tells him he's right. We've become too scientific in warfare, too dependent on perfect intelligence." Patton reminds us that speed and shock still matter. That statement is not praise detached from politics. It is an honest professional assessment delivered by a man who had spent 6 years watching modern warfare's relationship with preparation and speed shift under the pressure of actual operations. Churchill had defended Montgomery's methodical approach because it represented what British military culture valued and what British resources stretched thinner with every passing month required. In an entire airborne army, Churchill, the Victorian military student, recognized something that Churchill, the British Prime Minister, could not publicly endorse. Montgomery's post-war assessment of Patton, recorded in a documented 1947 conversation with a military historian, delivers the most honest professional verdict the rivalry produced. Montgomery said, "I would never have attempted it. Too risky, too dependent on luck, but it worked brilliantly. That's the difference between us. I never took unnecessary risks. Patton never saw a risk as unnecessary if it promised victory. History will judge which was wiser, but I'll concede this. On March 22nd, 1945, Patton's way was exactly what the situation demanded. That statement is not capitulation. Montgomery is not conceding general inferiority. He is making a context-specific professional concession that at Oppenheim in March 1945, against a thinly defended sector of a collapsing opponent, the aggressive, opportunistic approach was correct. His own operation and his own assessment was justified by different terrain, different opposition, and different strategic objectives. The rivalry never produced mutual respect, but it produced something rarer, honest professional reckoning after the pressure had passed. The first, what did Churchill actually believe about what Patton had done? The documented record answers this through his military secretary's account and his own post-war silence on the subject of imposing any consequence on Patton. Churchill believed Patton had done something professionally remarkable and politically inconvenient in equal measure. He chose to honor the former publicly and absorb the latter privately. The second, did Britain lose control of the war's final chapter at the Rhine? The documented shift in coalition power was already underway before March 1945. The Rhine crossing episode did not cause that shift, it illustrated it. When Eisenhower's letter of personal appreciation to Patton arrived the morning after an unauthorized crossing, and when Churchill chose composure over confrontation at the riverbank, the answer became visible to anyone reading the command signals carefully. American military judgment had set the tempo. British planning had delivered its operation. Both succeeded, but only one shaped the narrative that history remembered. The third, why did Churchill's choice at the Rhine matter beyond the immediate moment? Because it established the pattern for the war's final 6 weeks, a pattern in which American operational speed defined the pace of advance. Eisenhower managed the strategic architecture, and Britain's role, though essential and professionally executed, was no longer primary. Churchill understood this standing at the Rhine. "My dear General, the German is whipped. We have got him," he said it to Eisenhower. And in the politics of those words, the "we" had already shifted its weight. By April 1st, 1945, the Ruhr encirclement was complete. Approximately 300,000 German soldiers were enclosed, the largest encirclement of German forces in the entire Western campaign. That outcome required both crossings. Plunder's broad, deep northern bridgehead enabled the swing of armies around the Ruhr's northern edge. Third Army's rapid advance from Oppenheim provided the southern pincer. Neither crossing alone could have produced the Ruhr encirclement at the speed it actually occurred. Eisenhower's strategic architecture, two mutually supporting crossings with the northern operation as the primary effort worked. It worked in part because he had written a letter of appreciation rather than a reprimand, and in part because Churchill had chosen silence over confrontation at the Rhine. The war in Europe ended on May 8, 1945. The Rhine crossings of March 1945 were the penultimate act in the Western campaign, as U.S. and Navy operational records describe them. Both operations contributed to an outcome that exceeded what either could have achieved independently. That is the documented strategic reality. The political reality that American speed had outpaced British preparation, that the narrative belonged to Patton before Montgomery's guns had fired, and that Churchill had chosen to absorb that outcome rather than challenge it is a different kind of truth, and one that the Rhine crossing episode preserves with unusual clarity. Patton's communique to Eisenhower. "Dear Shay F., I have just pissed into the Rhine River. For God's sake, send some gasoline," captured something that no formal operational report could have expressed. It contained the supply frustration that had defined Third Army's entire European campaign, the theatrical self-awareness that made Patton a figure soldiers remembered, and the absolute confidence of a commander who knew his results had placed him beyond the reach of formal consequence. Churchill read about that communique. He had spent 3 years managing the relationship between British military culture and American command energy. He had defended Montgomery's methods. He had navigated the political mathematics of alliance warfare with more skill than any other political leader of the conflict. And at the Rhine in March 1945, he arrived to witness a British triumph and found instead a lesson in how wars end, not always according to the plan that was months in preparation, but sometimes according to the initiative of one commander who decided that tonight was the night and moved before anyone could tell him otherwise. The statistical legacy of the two crossings, measured in the terms that military historians use, is instructive precisely because it resists simple conclusions. Montgomery's operation involved a force so large that its logistics alone required months of preparation. It achieved a 35-mile-wide bridgehead, delivered the northern pincer of the Ruhr encirclement, and executed with the professional precision that its architect had promised. Its cost, over 500 casualties, reflected the genuine difficulty of the terrain, the opposition of the German 1st Parachute Army in the Wesel sector, and the scale of what was being attempted. Patton's operation involved one division, no preparation beyond the positioning of assault boats, and produced fewer than 34 casualties in the assault phase. Its cost reflected the genuine weakness of the Oppenheim sector and the accuracy of reconnaissance that identified a door the Germans had not bothered to guard. Both operations succeeded. Both contributed to final Allied victory. The difference was not an outcome. The difference was in the story those outcomes told about preparation versus speed, about British military tradition versus American operational instinct, and about which approach the world would remember when the Rhine crossing of March 1945 was described in every military history written for the next 80 years. Churchill returned to England after his 2 Rhine crossings with a political understanding that he did not publicly articulate, but that his subsequent actions reflected. He had seen the war's final act being written by American operational tempo. He had heard Eisenhower's assessment of the strategic situation, confident, authoritative, already oriented toward the post-Rhine phase of operations. He had watched Patton's crossing dominate the press narrative, despite Montgomery's far larger and more complex operation launching the same night. And he had made his choice: absorb the political cost, preserve the alliance, and focus British energy on the post-war negotiating table rather than the battlefield pecking order. That choice was not weakness. It was the clearest-eyed strategic decision Churchill made in the war's final months, a recognition that the battle for coalition primacy had already been decided at the Rhine, and that Britain's interests were better served by managing the peace than by contesting the narrative of how the final battles were won. The Rhine crossing of March 1945 endures not simply as a record of what Patton did, or what Montgomery planned, or what Eisenhower decided. It endures because every documented word spoken in those 72 hours, Patton's casual phone call to Bradley, Bradley's calibrated press timing, Montgomery's cold professional dismissal, Eisenhower's letter of personal appreciation, Churchill's "My dear General, the German is whipped," reveals the actual mechanics of how a major wartime coalition functions when the pressure is real and the history is being written in real time. Britain entered the war as the senior partner. It had held that position through North Africa, through Sicily, through Normandy. The Rhine crossing was not the moment Britain lost that position. The shift had been underway since 1943, as American industrial power and military scale exceeded what any other nation could match. But the Rhine crossing was the moment the shift became undeniable to everyone standing at the river. Churchill saw it. He chose to acknowledge it in the most statesmanlike way available, by saying, "We have got him," and letting the word "we" carry all the ambiguity that the moment required. Churchill stood at the Rhine, watched both crossings succeed, praised both publicly, and chose not to press for any formal consequence against Patton. Given everything the documented record shows about what he knew and what he chose to do, was that the right decision for Britain? Or did that choice at the Rhine mark the moment British strategic leadership in the Western Alliance became permanently secondary? Leave your answer in the comments below, and don't forget to subscribe and hit the notification bell.